Hey guys, my name is Loveless, and this time we're here with another one shot. I'm just going crazy with these uploads, or at least recording a shit ton and then gonna edit a shit ton. So, this one's Cry Me a River by by Carolina. Don't know if I said the name right, but I'm gonna make sure to put it in the description below because none of this shit is my work. I just read it. That's it. Just narration. Other than that, these are just masterpieces that I've seen on AO3 and I want to share the love. So let's get on straight to it. When Hisashi wanders into the teacher's lounge that morning, Shota locks eyes with him and there's no point even pretending he isn't crying. They left the house at different times. Shota usually can't sleep through the night, and so a few days a week he patrols before school starts. While Hisashi does his radio show before school and patrols before that, Shota still has no idea if Hisashi sleeps, several years into their marriage. Their morning routine together often begins when they meet at school, and that's not usually a problem. Except today, apparently, because again, Shota is crying. Shota hasn't cried in public since their wedding. Well, since about 15 minutes after the reception was over, when he started getting all emotional because the wine finally caught up with him. So, logically, Shota understands why Hisashi takes one look at him and bolts across the lounge to sweep Shota into a hug. It doesn't make it easier for Shota to get a grip on himself, that's for sure. What's going on? Hisashi asks, while he successfully gotten a hold of Shota, and he made sure that Shota isn't injured anywhere. Did something happen? Shota pulls back a glower at him and wipes his eyes with the back of his sleeves. The other teachers, largely gathered around the coffee table, keep shooting them awkward glances. Shota wonders how long they've been trying to get up the nerve to ask what's going on. If All Might had been there for once, maybe the situation would have been different. But nobody else is really a shoulder to cry on status with Aizawa. Not that Shota would allow All Might to touch him when he was upset, or ever. He was so grateful that All Might is allergic to being a responsible employee. Anyway, he got distracted from the real issue at hand, which is Hisashi is going into full hero mode and Shota needs to divert that as soon as possible. It's nothing, Shota says, frustrated. He gestures to the coffee machine, which is sort of smoking. I tried to make some damn coffee and it broke. Hisashi looks so concerned. He lifts a hand to wipe tears off of Shota's cheek and examining his face closely as to any sign of anything else going on. Shota scrubs at his face again because the tears are threatening to make a resurgence. I got hit with a quirk this morning because I wasn't watching where I was going. My eyes are really bad today. Oh, Hisashi said, sympathetic, and Shota knows he's thinking of the eye drops that he's seen on the counter at home. Forgotten. Do you need... No, I have some at my office. Plus, Shota gestures to his face, which is still blotchy. Got it covered. It's the quirk that's making me like this. Wait, the quirk is making you cry? Shota scowls, embarrassed to even have to explain himself. It appears to make me cry whenever I feel an emotion that perhaps a very emotional person would cry at. I hope you're hydrated, Hisashi says. There's a complicated look on his face that only Shota can decipher. And he realizes it's because Hisashi is shifting from being real concerned to being mock concerned. Is this a joke to you? Shota asks, but he's borderline smiling, which is much better than the Dadzawa feeling he's been feeling right before Hisashi had came in. He looks back to the broken coffee maker, and the smile is gone. I can't teach class like this. Without coffee? Hisashi teases. I can't stand you. Sit then. Hisashi pats Shota's arm consolingly. It's not the worst thing in the world. Some people cry every day. Maybe it's just catching up to you, and it isn't a quirk at all. Shota rolls his eyes magnificently, almost a full body movement. I specifically recall a man swearing at me for making him drop his groceries and activating his quirk. Maybe you spent too much time around that kid Midoriya. Hazashi ignores his husband's words and brushes his hand over Shota's cheek. Across the room, Nomori snorts, and Shota shoots her a betrayed look. It's really sweet that you've bonded so close with your class. Shota puts a palm over Hazashi's face and pushes him away. Gently, but still hard enough for Hazashi to know that Shota doesn't enjoy being bullied this early in the morning. He's now been reminded there's a 90% chance of him crying in front of the class of 3A, which is a nightmare scenario. You're sleeping on the couch. Sure. Hazashi glances at the clock, and so does Shota. And to both of their dismay, there's only a few minutes before they need to head to their respective classrooms. Let me walk you to class, alright? Hazashi says, I missed you this morning. Okay, I appreciate that. Shota says, his eyes filling up with tears as he speaks, just because his husband is making him feel loved just by looking at him. Damn it. He's going to be a laughingstock. Admittedly, he got hit by a quirk, not on patrol, but because he's too irresponsible to grab his eye drops on the way out the door. Would be humiliating. Shota zips the zipper of his sleeping bag so only his forehead is showing. And he still lies very still at the front of the class as he hears the children slowly congregating at their desk. He needs to steel himself because one worried comment or flinch or a downcast look from these damn kids is going to make him bawl again. Shota may not seem like it, but he knows himself, and he knows that this quirk is going to be more damaging to his reputation than the time where he accidentally wore one of his husband's sweaters to school. It had been the only thing in his drawer on laundry day, and he grabbed it without thinking, not even noticing the bright yellow lettering that says "Turn Up" with a little cartoon of Hazashi and his present mic "Get Up" underneath. Shota also got dressed in the dark at 3 in the morning, so it's hardly his fault. Hazashi still won't let him forget it. Hey, Hitoshi says as he comes in and nudges the sleeping bag. Good morning. Shota says, Hazashi said you had a good patrol last night. Hitoshi says, a lilt of teasing in his voice. Shota doesn't unzip the sleeping bag, but he says, good to know my beautiful family is constructed on the foundations of schadenfreude. I don't even know what that means. Hitoshi tells him, and then proceeds to contradict himself with an overly earnest, but good luck in school today. I'm really glad you're my dad. Shota says in a suspiciously thick voice, get in your seat before the bell rings. And Hitoshi laughs at him. A few minutes later, the aforementioned bell rings. Shota clears his throat and says, muffling into the layers of fabric, free study period for the upcoming exams. Keep it to a dull roar. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Alright, so maybe he's feeling a little bit like a coward today. It's better to let his students have some relaxing time now because the next few weeks are going to be hell for them. He takes a short nap. The students are more than happy without a lecture, and they don't bother him any further. Shota has no idea what time it is when someone pokes his sleeping bag, but he sticks his face out and blinks irritably at who turns out to be Yaoyorozu. Hello, Sensei? She coughs into the crook of her elbow, a rough scraping noise that says she has a cold, sweeping through the school right now. I'm finished with my homework. Can I go get coffee? I'll bring you some. Shota blinks at her again, bleary-eyed, and weighs the pros and cons. Yaoyorozu isn't someone who often gets recognized on the street of being a UA student, and she'll probably be going to the small cafe in the cafeteria anyway. The only issue is if another teacher saw her walking around, so he reluctantly gets out of his sleeping bag and finds a hall pass. I can't tell anyone I'm allowing this. I don't pick favorites. Of course, Sensei, Yaoyorozu says seriously, and trails closely behind him. You may take your girlfriend with you, but I'm trusting you to be responsible. Be back before class is over. I take my coffee with no sugar. Shota goes to zip up his sleeping bag up, but is stopped by Yayorozu saying, "Wait." She glances over her shoulder to the side of the classroom nearest the door, and Shota follows her gaze to Yutaraka. Most of the students have moved out of their normal seats, clumping into groups to work and chat quietly. But Yutaraka still is in her regular seat, hunched over a notebook, staring through it with a grimace on her face like something's hurting her. "Can I take Yutaraka too?" Yayorozu asks. I don't think she's eaten yet. Shota has been aware for several months that Yutaraka Ochako's family has issues with allowing for a robust food budget for their daughter sometimes. Still, today is today, and the image of Yutaraka violently trying to scrape through her English homework despite the fact that nausea is clearly distracting her hits Shota differently. "Aizawa?" Yayorozu asked, sharp with concern. Shota is crying. He calmly gives the hall pass to Yayorozu, along with the change in his pocket for his coffee, and says, "Go before I change my mind." "Are you..." She stares at him. "No sugar," he says firmly, despite the fact that tears are streaming down his face faster and faster. "Get Yutaraka some breakfast too." "Do you need..." Shota isn't sure what else he needs to say to Yayorozu to get her to forget this, but he finally decides on, "This isn't real. I got hit with a quirk at work last night that's making me do this at inopportune times. I suggest you don't worry about it." She frowns, but she turns back to her desk and grabs her wallet. Then she goes to collect Jiro, and the two of them coax Yutaraka out of her seat. Shota doesn't pick favorites, but Yayorozu is definitely high on that list. Shota makes a break for her sleeping bag as casually as possible, but before he can disappear inside, he hears someone ask, "Is Aizawa okay?" "Oh shit," someone else says. When Shota turns a glare on them, he finds that it's Kirishima and Kaminari who has blown his cover. Their comments have silenced the class, and now everyone is staring at Shota, even Todoroki, who usually takes all of Homeroom to fully wake up, and had previously been half asleep against Midoriya's shoulder, is watching him warily. All the kids look so worried about him, as if something is clearly wrong. The anxious look on Sero's face alone makes Shota shudder with an involuntary sob. Hitoshi in the back next to Todoroki is the only one who looks vaguely amused. He has his phone out, probably sending a video to Hizashi. But with one look from Shota, Hitoshi sets his phone back on his desk, sulking. "This is nothing," Shota says to the class, trying to sound as flat as possible. "Please go back to studying." "You're crying," Asui says into the heavy quiet. His students all care so much. It's what guilts Shota into explaining to himself, shattering his meticulous image forever. "I mean it when I said it's nothing. I've been hit with an unfortunate quirk, and it's going to take a couple of days for it to wear off." "That's a weird quirk." Midoriya perks up, no longer looking like All Might been hit by a car in front of him. "Are you just crying continuously, or is it triggered by something? It would be really powerful to force someone to cry for a long time, because it could dehydrate you eventually. So I'm assuming it's an on and off, right?" Shota refuses to wipe the tears off his face. Maybe if he ignores them altogether, everyone else will too. This particular bout of tears is slowing down anyway, now that he's faced with the 16 distraught toddlers. It's on and off. It's triggered by anything I'm feeling, from what I can tell. This gets them chattering amongst themselves, finally lessening the attention on him, so he can clean himself up a little bit. Shota should have expected this. He set a mental timer to see how long it would take them to weaponize this knowledge against him. Was it used defensively? Midoriya presses for more information, leaning forward on his desk, kneeling on the seat of his chair. How did it work in combat? Telling part of the truth earlier had been the most rational course of action, but it's out of the question to reveal anything about the fact that a sleep-deprived, anxious Shota had forgotten his eye drops at home and had crashed into some poor middle-aged asshole who had been carrying his grocery bags home at 7 in the morning. Maybe it was the asshole's fault for getting up so early to go grocery shopping. That's a good question, Shota says noncommittally. He tries very hard not to be endeared when he sees Midoriya's already scribbling something in one of his notebooks about the incident. Could you perhaps be looking for a way to weaponize your own crying? As if Midoriya doesn't weaponize his crying enough, All Might would level a whole block of buildings if Midoriya got sniffles enough. Shirideku just wants to study that stupid quirk so he can find a way to stop crying at everything. Bakugo contributes. Midoriya flushes red but bites back with, maybe you should learn about it so you can feel something for once. I'll fucking kill you, Bakugo threatens. But strangely, neither his or Midoriya's hackles are raised. It almost seems like they're friends these days. Shoto's eyes prickle, and thankfully he's given a distraction. That's actually a good point, Todoroki says, in an uncharacteristically loud tone for Homeroom. Have you considered the possibility it's Midoriya's fault that Aizawa's like this? That sounds like a conspiracy theory, Ida says, torn between interested and exasperated. Hitoshi, with the evil smirk of someone who's texting Hazashi for the last 15 minutes, says, no, he has a point. Midoriya cries like every day. I do not, Midoriya says. He's crying right now, Ashido accuses, pointing. I'm not, Midoriya protests tearfully. Kirishima says, who cares if he is? It's super manly to express your emotions instead of bottling them up. Midoriya cares about his friends, and it's really cool that he shows that. Ashido minds throwing up the whole time Kirishima is giving this impassioned speech. Kirishima elbows her once he notices. We're getting off topic, Kero, Asui says, and nods back to Todoroki. What are you saying? Todoroki pushes his bangs out of his face with his free hand and stands up straighter, at his bullshit theory starting to gain traction in his head. I'm saying maybe it's because Midoriya makes everyone around him more empathetic by osmosis. That's gay, Bakugo says. Are you fucking gay? Bakugo! Shota says sternly on reflex, because despite the fact that everyone is aware of Bakugo and Kirishima's intricate and confusing slow burn courtship rivals, Bakugo's harsh tone makes Midoriya tense up and duck his head. It appears there's still unresolved issues there. What? Bakugo snarls, gesturing to Todoroki, who is actively holding Midoriya's hand. He's literally being gay right now. It takes one to know one, bitch, Ashido says to Bakugo over the sound of everyone snickering. Midoriya kind of relaxes, much preferring the trend of the class bullying Bakugo instead of vice versa, and Kaminari puts a protective arm around Midoriya to further pull him back into the present. Scratch that. Shota's on the verge as Midoriya beams at his friends again. Considering the fact that it took all of them about a day in the dorms to start using the fire alarm system for evil, Kirishima to the day vehemently denies that it was him who set a stack of homework on fire so that the fire alarm would go off and interrupt Aoyama's 45-minute shower concert. It takes longer than Shota had expected for his students to get on the face of using the quirk against him. If he wanted to avoid it completely, Shota should have confiscated Hitoshi's phone. His mental timer runs out as Hitoshi clears his throat and diverts the conversation and says with his most chiburic face, Aizawa, could I say something on behalf of the class? We really love having you as a teacher. Thank you for keeping us safe and teaching us so much. Shota's gonna ground this kid. His vision gets blurry. It's my job, he says with no inflection whatsoever. Aww, Ashido coos. This is going to be a very long class period. Yaoyorozu shows up 15 minutes later with 2 drinks in her hand, a more vibrant looking Yudaraka, and Jiro's holding a box of tissues. Kaminari whines. No fair. Why did they get to go get food? Shota accepts the coffee and tissue, coolly ignoring the smug look that Jiro is giving. Yaoyorozu had clearly explained the situation to our companions, because Yutaraka doesn't spiral to the same level of worry as the others when she first sees the tears steadily streaking down Shota's face. These current tears are the courtesy of a card that the class had just made 5 minutes before. Most of the students' signatures gathered around a sketch of Yutaraka with hearts around it. It's absolutely hideous, and the sob that it resulted in, not something that Shota would ever want anyone to see. Yutaraka's face has some color back in it, and she laughs like she feels much better. She says, "It must feel good to cry, because don't be embarrassed and say, we all cry all the time in this class." That's true. It's not just Midoriya. Jiro agrees. Midoriya nods his head, not raising to the bait or even looking up to another piece of shitty art that he's making for Shota. "Yeah, even All Might cried a couple days ago," Kirishima says, "because he's manly." "No, he cried because he's Midoriya's secret dad." Todoroki contradicts, because apparently the only thing that gets him awake before 10 in the morning is getting on a conspiracy theory kick and drinking half of Yaoyorozu's coffee. The image comes unbidden to Todoroki at the beginning of the first year. Detached, glassy-eyed and angry, withdrawn, and it's such cognitive distance from how energetic Todoroki is right now, cuddling amongst his classmates, that Shota has to wipe his face with the crook of his elbow. Maybe he shouldn't have let Yaoyorozu go for coffee. It makes Shota worried that the kids in their final examination season, when all of them are going to be subsisting fully on caffeine, and they're all going to be like this. Todoroki says adamantly, "Think about it for a second. All the teachers who love Midoriya suddenly get all teary-eyed. Makes you think." Hitoshi examines his nail, finely detached. "I agree. Aizawa does seem to be acting more parental lately." "Excellent point," Ashido says. Her face is serious. It's difficult to tell whether or not she understands the irony of all this. "He's almost soft." "I don't enjoy any of you," Shota says, which is difficult to get out because his voice is so rough now. His sinuses are stuffy. He feels like his head is going to explode. "No, we're your favorite class. President Mike told us." Shota is going to ground him, and when he's going to figure out the equivalent of grounding for his husband. And then he's going to figure out a way of getting back with his family without pushing them for caring about him in their own awful way. President Mike says a lot of things, and it goes to show you that you should question even those you look up to, Shota says evenly, and then throws another diversion at the kids. For example, he also believes the last All Might movie was good. Kaminari says, "Wait, but it wasn't bad. It just got picked by a different studio." "Here we go," Jiro says, putting her face in her hands, as Midoriya, seemingly activated like a sleeper agent by some trigger word, launches into a thorough courtroom-ready argument, tearing down All Might's ascendance. If he's been thinking ahead at all, he would have made this some sort of learning experience for his students. Instead, he's sitting on a table at the front of his class, alternating between scolding his students when they get too rowdy and dissolving into tears at random intervals. He glances at the clock. Shota's been wading through the shards of his dignity for an hour now, and his feet are getting cut up. He feels fine dismissing the class a few minutes early, and he points to the door and speaking up so he can be heard over 14 animated conversations that are taking place. "Get out of my class." "Feel better, sensei?" Ashido bolts from the classroom with Kirishima in tow, not faltering at all when Shota gives her a glare. He gets quite a few reassuring words and smiles from his students as they file out. And Shota accepts Midoriya's drawing and briefly sneaks a hug from Hitoshi. And then he's finally alone. He sits in his sleeping bag and puts his head on his knees and takes some calm breaths. This quirk wouldn't be so hard for Shota if the kids weren't so damn young. They're so young. And they have so little time before Shota can't protect them anymore. The drawing that Midoriya gives him is splattered with tears, and he sighs, slipping it into his pocket before he distorts it further. It's going on the fridge, but it doesn't mean he has to be happy about it. Shota somehow lives through his next two classes. His other classes don't usually drain the life out of him the same way 3A does, because his other classes don't find it enjoyable to give Shota heart palpitations. And he chalks up the croaky voice and the puffy eyes to a code that everyone else has, so that gives him a wide berth. But he knows it. It's lunchtime, and he finally slams 2 bottles of water and takes a real nap. Shota can't admit that it is his fault for running straight into All Might. He's distracted, and he's not following any of his advice that he gives to his students. And he slams into all 15 square feet of the former number 1 hero as he rounds the corner. Shota bounces off him and hitting the ground, and the shock makes him cry. This is the worst day of his life. All Might is freaked out, to say the least. He hurriedly pulled Shota back onto his feet, and his enormous hands hover around the vicinity of his shoulders, all the while saying, "I'm sorry, Eraserhead. I should have been watching where I was going. I didn't mean to upset you. Are you alright? You don't look like you're feeling well." Shota wipes at the tears that are pooling in his eyes, frustrated. "I'm fine. It was my fault. You don't need to take the blame for it. Forget about it." It appears that isn't going to reassure All Might. Professional busybody, Shota sighs. They aren't real tears. It's a quirk from a patrol accident. Shota isn't going to go into the semantics of whether or not he's lying when he says they aren't real tears. That's not a discussion for now. I just need to get some water. "Is that the truth?" All Might asks. "I have no reason to lie about this," Shota snaps. The effect is lessened because Shota becomes hiccuping through his words, like he's some infant calming down from a tantrum. "You lie to your students sometimes in order to achieve a favorable outcome." All Might is still waving his arms around like a moron, trying to figure out a way to comfort Shota. "So you might think it's a good lie to tell, because I would be inclined to believe it was a patrol accident." Shota narrows his eyes. "I'm not lying," he insists, and his voice cracks like he's in high school again. All Might hesitantly says, "All right." He pats Shota on the head like Shota is Midoriya, and Shota wants to die. All Might's hands could crush his head in his grip, but All Might doesn't put Shota out of his misery. He just rests a hand on top of Shota's hair like he could seep out everything wrong with Shota just from that touch. The most annoying part is All Might had passed good judgment. The pat on the head feels really good. That's what makes Shota glare even darker as he ducks out of All Might's hold. "President Mike is in your office," All Might says, not looking offended at all. "Bastard. I passed him on my way here. He said he wanted to speak with you." "Right," Shota says and sniffles. He still can't tell if All Might's just oblivious about the fact that he and Hazashi are married, or if All Might missed the politeness window to ask if they were actually together, and now he's going to be awkward about it for the rest of time. "Thanks." He dodged around All Might and hurried down the hall towards his office. All Might watched him go in a weirdly concerned way. Hazashi greets him with a tight, reassuring hug, and Shota finally sinks into it, kicking the office door behind him so Hazashi is the only one who sees that this simple act makes him tears up again. "Aw, what's wrong?" Hazashi asks when he hears Shota's breathing hitch, with his sweet smile and his voice giving him plausible deniability as to whether or not he was being a rude bastard right now. Shota is the only person in the world who can say for sure that Hazashi is, in fact, being a rude bastard right now. "I'll kick your ass," Shota croaks out, but he feels too comfortable by the hug right now to actually move. Hazashi laughs and slowly smooths down Shota's hair in a repetitive motion. "You couldn't." Shota draws back and sniffles again. His head feels like it's stuffed full of cotton balls. This is why he doesn't ever fucking cry. "Do you want some tea?" "I already made some," Hazashi says brightly, and points to Shota's desk, which has 2 packed lunches on it, along with Shota's electric kettle, and Shota's face crumbles again. I love you so much, Shota sobs, and Hazashi laughs softly and pulls him into another embrace. Shota's hoping for a downhill coast for his last few classes of the day. Ideally, he could do some lecturing and then bolt off campus to deal with his situation by himself without any of his students getting the satisfaction of seeing him like this again. All Might, as he wants to do, ruins Shota's hopes and dreams. He corners Shota as Shota's trying to coax himself out of his office and asks Shota to help the faculty hero training for 3A. Shota squares up to All Might, demanding to know whether All Might actually needs his help or if Class 3A just has All Might wrapped around their little pinky fingers. But All Might gets an uncomfortable, earnest look on his face and says something about inviting a lot of the other teachers, and then he says some bullshit about how he always trusted Shota as a good teacher. Shota flees the confrontation before All Might can see more treacherous tears fall down his face. He wonders as he slurps another full bottle of water how long this stupid quirk is going to last. By the end of lunch, he already has been feeling a little more stable, and Hazashi has failed to get Shota to cry with a mere compliment as they parted. So that must be progress. But he feels like he's cried so much that he could be hung up to dry like beef jerky. He certainly doesn't want to be fighting his students right now. Maybe he can find a pro with the duplication quirk to create a clone of Shota to do the fighting for him. Maybe if Shota gave one of Ectoplasm's clones some of his clothes, everyone could pretend it was him. He seriously considered this as he watched his students stream out of the cafeteria. It would traumatize the kids if they punched Shota and he dispelled into ectoplasm. On the other hand, a clone wouldn't blubber its way through hand-to-hand combat with a teenager, which is sounding attractive to his shattered pride right now. It's a dilemma. Unfortunately, Class 3A arrives perfectly on time, hell-bent on milking the situation for all it's worth. And his time to figure out a solution has elapsed before he can do anything. They present him with another hand-drawn card, and Shota thanks them quietly and then does not run. He speedwalks away from the class to find where the teachers are congregating, more specifically where his husband is. Rough day? Numuri asked, amused. It hasn't escaped her attention that Shota's leaning so far into Hazashi's side that Hazashi has had to take a very wide, firm stance with his feet to keep his balance. Shota knows that his eyes are swollen, his face is splotchy, and his voice is hoarse enough that he might as well be speaking through crumbled balls of aluminum foil. He doesn't answer Nomuri's question. Instead, he puts on his goggles, he asks his ectoplasm, will the teachers be fighting students or teaming up with them and fighting other teachers? I think we're just obstacles, Ectoplasm says, clearly disappointed. As in, we're not even really fighting them. We're just trying to slow them down. Shota turns his head back to Nomuri, silently saying, "You're safe for now," and she shakes her head at him. "It's okay to feel things, Eraser," she says. "I'll let you know when that happens," he says, and rebuffs all further attempts at the conversation. The training situation for the day is a maze. Cementos had the time of his life setting it up, and the support class had contributed quite a few booby traps and other obstacles. The corridors have a low ceiling, keeping students like Utaraka from simply floating over all the walls to find the goal, and Shota's given directions towards the section by the east entrance, between a gauntlet of lasers and tightrope suspension over a deep pit. "Good luck, honey," Hazashi says, patting him on the back rapidly. Shota, with an impressed dry-eyed, says, "You too." There are 5 entrances into the maze, so there'll be 5 students racing each other in each round. That means, hopefully, that Shota will have only to encounter 4 of his students unless someone gets hopelessly lost. The first is Ida. He's very professional about the whole situation, and he's one of the few students who has avoided provoking Shota's tears on purpose. So Shota feels prepared for a normal fight when he sees that Ida's clearing the laser field and rocketing towards Shota's shadowed hiding spot. Shota throws out his capture tape, aiming to ensnare Ida, but Ida sees him at the last moment and rockets out the way, towards the ceiling. It's a small space, but Ida moves quickly to evade capture, putting his recent internship work to good use. He twists over Shota's head and bolts towards the corridor stretching away from them, towards the tightrope, but Shota uses his tape to snatch Ida out of the air and throw him back towards the lasers. Ida activates his engines again and propels himself back down to the ground when he lands into a crouch and he rolls out of the way of Shota's tape. "I wouldn't be half the person I am today without you," Ida shouts, his earnest even though the words are precise and chosen specifically to affect Shota. "I've looked up to you both as a teacher and as a hero." "Shut up!" Shota snaps, but the damage is done. His vision is blurry, and his control over the tape loosens for a split second in his annoyance, and Ida activates his boost and disappears down the corridor before Shota can recover. "Damn it!" Shota says, just to himself. Even without the quirk's effects, he's getting soft. The next student to appear is Jiro. She lands off with a huge blast, but Shota cuts her off halfway through, leading her to search for other options. Jiro shouts as she charges, "My band is having a concert on Saturday. Would you want to come?" Shota braces himself for impact and sends his tape out trying to ensnare her, but she spins out of the way of the tape and plants her feet and sends out another sonic attack. He erases it and she says, "My parents don't talk to me and you're the only adult who supports my music." "I don't do concerts." Shota wipes his tears out of his eyes, unblinking. "President Mike would love your music. Ask him." "It's at 8 on Saturday, and I want you to come." Jiro says. She unplugs her earphone jacks and lunges straight at him, ramming him in the sternum with her shoulders and in the chin with her fists. But he uses his tape to shove her back. As she plummets through the air, she flails around for a safe landing position, and she says, "It would really mean a lot to, oh God, if you would come, because no adult has ever given a shit about me like you do." "Shut up," Shota hissed, because the tears are streaming down his face, forcing him to blink, and he hears Jiro scramble to her feet and sprints past him, tossing him back an enormous sonic pulse. "Thanks, Sensei," she shouts as soon as she comes out of combat range. "I'll be there," he calls from his heap on the ground, begrudgingly, and Jiro's laugh echoes through the hallway back to him. It's 10 minutes before the next student appears. Shota hears the humming of lasers and the distant yelling of other fights happening. There was a rumble of concrete somewhere and a muffled version of Hazashi's overwhelming sonic attacks. It's enough time to get a hold of his emotions again, and he's glad for the prep time when Yutaraka appears at the end of the hallway. Yutaraka clears the lasers and charges down the side corridor, and then presumably hits a dead end and pops back into sight, annoyed at the delay. She doesn't attack until she's very close, at which point she attempts to levitate herself to vault over Shota's head. Shota erases her quirk at the exact moment that she tries to get momentum and then sweeps out his leg to knock Yutaraka off balance. Yutaraka opts for jumping over the leg and then kicking Shota in the chest, effectively startling Shota into blinking, and then she makes a break for it while he's distracted. Shota hits the wall hard. He recovers fast enough with his capture tape and slings her back towards the lasers. He knows that the longer he delays Yutaraka's journey through the maze, the more frantic she'll get. So he needs to toe the line between actually fighting and just bothering her a little bit. Yutaraka hits the ground and rolls a few meters. She doesn't get up. Shota says, cautious, "Yutaraka?" He has a distinct impression that she's playing dead. However, it's Shota's job to make sure that his students don't die for real. So he inches forward, capture tape at the ready. Yutaraka doesn't move. The closer Shota gets, the more he can see that Yutaraka appears to be shaking. "What is it?" Shota asks, dropping to crouch near Yutaraka. She weakly moves her arms around her stomach. "I overdid it," she gets out. "It's been a rough week." "Can you get up?" Shota asks her, because it's strange for her threshold to be so low and he needs to assess the seriousness of the issue. "I don't know." Yutaraka blinks tears out of her eyes, which in turn makes Shota tear up, because the universe despises him. Yudaraka turns her head sharply at the sound of Shota's sniff, and behind her superficial expression of pain, Shota realizes too late that his previous hunch had been correct. Yudaraka is just acting. Got him, Yudaraka says brightly and smacks Shota's arm to levitate him, kicks him back with both feet before leaping back up and bolting down the hallway. It's not a bad strategy, Shota admits reluctantly as he watches her vault over the tightrope area while he's helplessly pinwheeling through the air. It wouldn't work in real combat, and she lost a fair chunk of time to make her acting more believable, but her crocodile tears might have practical applications in hero work. He tumbles to the ground as soon as she's out of sight, and he stays there to get his energy back before the next student appears. He reaches for his water bottle and scowls at the ceiling and hopes and prays that the next student that shows up isn't a student that will play with his emotions to win. The students must be able to see inside the maze, though, cameras or something, because otherwise the probability of Hitoshi showing up as the fourth student is pushing even Shota's bad luck to a new level. What's up? Hitoshi asks, out of breath from dodging through the laser field. Shota doesn't answer. Jiro says you cried because she invited you to her show. Hitoshi says he isn't moving forward. He still hesitates to leap straight into hand-to-hand altercations. Midoriya wants me to tell you that was, quote, tender. Shota opens his mouth, then closes it again. He whips the capture tape out to grab Hitoshi, but Hitoshi leaps out of the way and focuses on evasion for now. Also, the class says you replaced All Might as the most likely to cry at graduation, Hitoshi says, fainting one way, then scooting along the wall in the opposite direction. This quirk has really outed you as someone who cares about us. That's slander, Shota snaps tearfully as he lunges to stop Hitoshi. His mind goes blank. He wakes up when Hitoshi comes back and pats him on the shoulder, smiling sheepishly. I lied about the class vote thing. The betrayal, Shota mumbles, kinda woozy from the brainwashing, and his son helps him back onto his feet. The exercise must be over because the ceiling and walls are sinking back into the floor around them, slowly exposing the various traps and gadgets, and the teachers scattered throughout the training area. Hazashi beams and throws up a peace sign in greeting when he spots Shota. One of the lenses of his sunglasses shattered and blood was seeping out of one cut below his eye. Ida, Ashido, and Bakugo were the three fastest, Yudaraka in close fourth place, but again, her theoretics cost her a win, and Recovery Girl started making her rounds. Hazashi bounced over, refraining from full PDA in front of the students, but still giving Shota a radiant smile, and Hitoshi a hair ruffle. How's our crybaby doing? Damp as ever, Hitoshi sighs. Shota frowns at both of them. That's not true, it's wearing off. Is it? Hazashi asks. Then you don't mind me saying it. You are the literal light of my life, and every day I spent married to you is a joy. I wish I could say the same, Shota croaks out, frantically wiping his face with his sleeves and turning away back to find Recovery Girl to fix the cut on Hazashi's face, while Hitoshi and Hazashi cackle at him. The bright side of all this, Shota thinks, is that he might sleep through the night for once. He hears the click of Hazashi turning the lamp off, and then soft footsteps, and then the creak and shift of the bed, as Hazashi climbs in on the other side. He's trying to be so quiet, and Shota figures he thinks Shota is already asleep. He rolls over and slings an arm over Hazashi's waist, latching on as securely as he would without suffocating him. Oh, you're awake, Hazashi says, pleasantly surprised. He moves like he's going to do something stupid, like get up. I made you some tea. It's out in the kitchen. Shota tightens his grip. It's fine. It'll help you stop being so stuffy. Shota breathes through his mouth and presses his forehead into Hazashi's chest. It doesn't matter. Honey, you must be feeling so yucky after today. Hazashi combs fingers through Shota's hair. Let me take care of you. Shota's eyes gets watery, but he doesn't outright burst into tears, so that's progress. You take care of me just fine. You put up with a hell of a lot. I'm not putting up with anything, Hazashi says. I was the one who had the guts to propose. I love you, Shota says, the shirt that he's pressed his face into getting suspiciously damp. I love you too, Hazashi hums, delighted. There was a smile in his voice as he said it. If this quirk isn't fixed by tomorrow, I'm fixing you up with an IV drop. If this quirk isn't fixed by tomorrow, I'm fixing you up with an IV drop. If you take me near a hospital for this, I will call my lawyer. Shota feels, rather than hears, his husband scoff. Not if I call her first. I've been lawyer approached? Damn right. Hazashi kisses the top of Shota's head. Both of them let the conversation end after that. Hazashi plays with Shota's hair for a while, braiding it together and untangling it, and starting over a few times. Shota's almost asleep when he remembers something and mumbles, Remind me to talk to you later about turning our son against me. I would never do such a thing, Hazashi says, equally sleepy, and that's that. Oh my lord. This one took fucking forever. I was trying some new stuff, and also this story itself is long as fuck. This story is so fucking good though. Like, it made me laugh constantly throughout this damn reading. I'm just having a time of my life, just like laughing at Aizawa's misery. Like, the whole class is just, everyone's foundation is schadenfreude, and it's true. It's like everyone used it against him, and he's like, I kind of want to know if it actually wears off, or was it the quirk, or was it not the quirk, and what happened, and what was the, like, I want to know these questions. I have questions. I need answers. But also, one of the tags that it says, it's so, I love it. It says, Aizawa has a disease. It's called caring too much, and it's incurable. And I was like, oh my god, yes. So accurate, yes. But I love this. This is going to probably take forever and a half to actually edit. But it was fun. And also the other thing that I was trying this bionic reading. I'm not too sure if I'll keep doing that because that might have, like, yeah, in a way it sort of helps me a little bit, but then I'm getting confused on how far in the story I am to see if how far I am with, like, stopping or halfway through the story or not, because it's a little bit confusing. Well, probably will stop using it. I don't know. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more of this, you know what to do. Bye.